Hey, welcome back to Figure It Out. I'm about to embark on my third build in this 4-base build challenge. And we're going to be doing a diorama here for Leatherface, a little Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I've chosen the kitchen. It's an indoor space, which I haven't done before. So we're going to try to see what an indoor space looks like, if we can do some miniatures and things like that. Well, this build starts out with a tile floor. And I've never done one before, so let's figure out how to do a tile floor together. So I've decided I'm going to try 3 different techniques or 3 different ways to make a tile floor. Well, the first is just simply to take the foam base that I've designated for this particular diorama, this 8-inch by 10-inch foam base, and I'm going to score lines in the base and basically cut the tiles in the base itself. And so I'm just laying out some 1-inch score lines going both directions, and this essentially will create the tiles in the base itself. One thing I do need to do is I need to go ahead and widen the lines, and so I have this little tool here. This is a sculpting tool for clay, and it's got a thin end and sort of a thicker end. And I'm just running the thin end through the kerfs in the base, and that's going to widen those cut lines. And once I've done that on both directions, I'm going to take the little fatter end and just press it a little bit to give a little bit of relief, a little bit of curve on the ends of each of those tiles. So when I get that done, you can see how it's kind of rounded out a little bit. The second tile base, I'm going to actually cut out tiles. I've got some heavy, or I guess medium weight chipboard, and I'm going to just cut out some tiles and glue them onto a foam base. I've got this clear Gorilla Glue, and I'm going to use that. I don't know if it's going to work well, but it seems like it would. What I like about it is the setup time is not very fast, and it gives me a lot of time to lay the tiles down, kind of fuss with them a little bit, make sure the gaps are reasonably even and straight. I can spread the glue using just a longer piece of that chipboard, and that actually worked really well. I was very happy with how this glue set up when everything was said and done. Spreads really easily. The only thing you got to worry about, or at least be considerate about, is not making that glue too thick, because it'll squeeze up into the grout lines in between the tile, and that will affect it. One thing that was great about that chipboard is I could just cut it with scissors. It really wasn't complicated at all. I'm going to take another piece of that same chipboard, that medium weight chipboard, and I'm just going to etch lines in it. Now, this couldn't be a base in itself. You would have to glue it to a piece of wood or a piece of foam, but this is hopefully going to be a much faster way to create tile, and if I can just figure out how to etch this correctly. So I made the score lines just like I did in the foam, and I've actually cut this piece of chipboard to be the same dimension as my foam base, and if I like it, I can actually glue it on the foam base. I'm trying to widen those score lines. That knife didn't do a really good job, that table knife, that serrated edge. Now I'm going to try this. It's really just a bottle opener, but it's scratching those lines wider, which is really what I needed to kind of create some relief. Weird thing about the chipboard though is that it was actually denser or harder in certain places, so it made it kind of hard to score. Now I'm going to paint everything with the black Mod Podge and Mod Podge and paint, black paint, excuse me, just to kind of tighten everything up and give it some added protection, especially those foam bases. Now I've got to make some grout, and honestly the best thing I could have done would have been to go to the store and get some non-sanded grout. But I didn't have that on hand, and I didn't have any of the really right materials, so this isn't the best thing to use. You'd be much better off getting some putty from the craft store. I just use some drywall compound, a little bit of Mod Podge, a little bit of paint. And the problem with using drywall compound is that it will shrink, and so I'm just using a piece of foam board as my trowel. I didn't want to use a metal trowel because it'll scratch up that foam quite a bit, so I needed something very soft to use as a trowel. So just using this piece of foam core. I'm not going to use grout on the chipboard because the etched parts of the chipboard aren't deep enough, but I'm using it on the two pieces of foam. So now I'm going to paint everything up. I'm going to start with a white base. I'm going to add a little bit of gray to it because I don't want it to be stark white. I want it to be a little on the dingy side, but just a little bit of gray. It's going to look like white as it's going on, but that's really just a super light gray. This is going to take 2 coats on all pieces, but it seems to work out well once I get it all on there. Even painting the chipboard base with that same light gray. I thought it might be a good idea to go ahead and really accent those grout lines using a dark wash. It's interesting how this turned out. So going on, it looked like it was going to be okay, but it really dried heavy. And so on that foam piece, I wanted to go ahead and spread it out a little bit. On the chipboard, I wanted to let it bead up a bit to see if I can make it real dirty looking. So I left that like that. And then with the glued up pieces of tile, I kind of did it in between. A little heavier, but spread it out so there wasn't so many bubbles. Well, once it dried, I really hated it. And so I decided I would go get some rubbing alcohol and take off much as I could. But it left this really great dingy looking tile. Like once I took it all off, I don't know if I could have gotten that same effect a different way. And so I'm really pleased with how that turned out. I hated what it looks like when it dried, but once I started taking that rubbing alcohol and taking it off on all these bases, they really looked good. They really looked like what I wanted them to look like with just the dark wash. So it's kind of like dark wash and take it off. You'll notice that chipboard bends slightly. That's fine because if I'm ever going to use it, I'll have to glue it down to something. So I'll glue it flat no matter what. But now I'm going to practice a little bit with a new little product I've got. It's a wet palette. I've seen some talk about how good the wet palette is for painting. Immediately I used it wrong. I filled it up too much, and so I had to pour some water out, and then I poured too much out. So I need a little bit of practice with this wet palette, but it's supposed to keep your paints from drying out. It'll give you a lot of time to work, and you can blend on the wet palette itself. If you're a painter and you're watching this, you will see that I am not using this the right way. I'm dipping into the water and using that to dilute my paint. I should have been putting it in the cup right away instead of going back into the water of the palette itself. That just muddies everything. Don't do that. I kind of didn't figure that out till halfway, but so right now what I'm doing is I'm taking these paints and I'm blending them, and I'm trying to create some staining on these floors. And so I'm doing a variety of yellows and oranges, blacks, browns, tans, and creating some different stains. Super diluting it. I'm really pushing a lot of water into this paint, and then I'm blotting it off. And as I'm getting through, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna do the corners pretty heavy, do the sides pretty heavy, because that's what I would consider the floor to look like in a real rundown building. I really like how it's looking though. I like the staining on that. I think that there's definitely something to it. So I'm gonna press that same staining into the other two bases to see what I can get those to look like. Same technique, just a little bit of paint, a lot of water, and then dabbing it off, blotting it off with a paper towel. There's base number 2. Let's go to the final base that I'm going to be using. I've decided that this is the one I'm going to be using for the diorama that I'm creating. So in my head, as I'm putting down these stains, I'm kind of laying out where things are going to be in the room itself. All right, well, this was actually quite interesting. I'm really glad that we got a chance to do this tile floor 3 ways. And I have decided that I'm going to stick with this one that is the base of that glued up base that we started with for this 4-base challenge. So I'm going to be using this base here for the diorama. I think the paint turned out really well. It is, out of all of them, the much more precise, much more defined tiles as I cut them straight into the foam themselves. But there's a lot of advantages to all of the different ones that we did. And so the one where it's glued up, I think actually looks a little bit more, what you might say, realistic, from a sense that there's imperfections in the grout lines, and in a lot of spaces in real life you'll find imperfections in the grout lines. There's also some variance in the heights of the tiles, just slightly, just a little bit, but not unlike what you might see in real life. These two, I believe, were the best options when it comes to putting a diorama together, either cutting it straight into the foam itself, or if you want to go ahead and cut out tiles and glue them on. I think those are both very effective in what they look like. If you were going to do something that wasn't going to be like dirty, if you want to do something very clean, I think either one of these would actually work really well. And this one obviously being more precise, so if this was the functionality was going to be, I don't know, a little bit more formal, then I would do this. If it was going to be a little bit more homey or you know, a bathroom, I would use this technique. I think either works. The, I guess, least favorite was just taking the chipboard and etching the tiles in. Although once I got this done, I don't hate it. I don't hate the paint job in this. I think it actually looks pretty good. In fact, I began thinking about if this were a bathroom, what this might look like. And I think as a back wall, this might work really well if you had some foam you could glue it up to and make it go you could do this very quickly. This was not hard, it was not difficult, it was not very time consuming. So you could really do this fairly quickly, much faster than the glue up part. But I mean, take a look at that. I mean, you could easily see, you know, kind of your bathroom scene here, what that might look like. I think that actually looks pretty good. Don't hate it. So, you know, the chipboard, my least favorite as far as the results are concerned, although I think it does have its place. And I think as wall tile, that's probably the place. That's it. It's tile 3 ways. And of course, we made all of them dirty because I really was trying to test out some painting techniques. And in those techniques, I found that it worked really well. The staining, you know, what we figured out was, I mean, the dark wash was kind of a real loss, but there's always, man, this whole channel is about me making mistakes and figuring out how to fix them and figuring out how to make it look better. That's okay, right? And so if you'll never do it if you don't just get out there and give it a shot. And so I would encourage you guys to make mistakes. It's fine. And there are ways to correct those. But once we took that alcohol and began to wipe that down, and it left that kind of grime on there from the dark wash, and then we were able to put the staining with that very, very diluted paint and blotting it off. I think the staining, man, that turned out really, really well. Thanks a lot for watching Figure It Out. I really appreciate you guys watching. It is a huge help to me if you will subscribe to this channel, share the video, if you'll hit the like button, and even make a comment. By making comments, you guys help put my videos out so that more people can see them and more people can subscribe. Again, the goal is 1,000 subscribers. We're way off, but we're trying to get there, so help me out with that. I really appreciate it. Most of you guys have been so supportive online. I really appreciate it. So thanks for watching, and we will see you next time on Figure It Out.